Matthew Henry's Commentary on the Whole Bible. 1 Chronicles 21. As this rehearsal makes no mention of David's sin in the matter of Uriah, so neither of the troubles of his family that followed upon it, not a word of Absalom's rebellion or Sheba's. But David's sin, in numbering the people, is here related, because, in the atonement made for that sin, an intimation was given of the spot of ground on which the temple should be built. Here is 1. David's sin in forcing Joab to number the people, verses 1 to 6. 2. David's sorrow for what he had done, as soon as he perceived the sinfulness of it, verses 7 and 8. 3. The sad dilemma, or trilemma rather, he was brought to, when it was put to him to choose how he would be punished for this sin, and what rod he would be beaten with, verses 9 to 13. 4. The woeful havoc which was made by the pestilence in the country, and the narrow escape which Jerusalem had from being laid waste by it, verses 14 to 17. 5. David's repentance and sacrifice, upon this occasion, and the staying of the plague thereupon, verses 18 to 30. This awful story we met with, and meditated upon, 2 Samuel 24. The giants subdued, 1017 BC. 1. And Satan stood up against Israel, and provoked David to number Israel. 2. And David said to Joab and to the rulers of the people, Go, number Israel from Beersheba even to Dan, and bring the number of them to me, that I may know it. 3. And Joab answered, The Lord make his people 100 times so many more as they be, but, my lord the king, are they not all my lord's servants? Why then doth my lord require this thing? Why will he be a cause of trespass to Israel? For nevertheless the king's word prevailed against Joab. Wherefore Joab departed, and went throughout all Israel, and came to Jerusalem. 5. And Joab gave the sum of the number of the people unto David. And all they of Israel were 1,000,000 and 100,000 men that drew sword, and Judah was 410,000 men that drew sword. 6. But Levi and Benjamin counted he not among them, for the king's word was abominable to Joab. Numbering the people, one would think, was no bad thing. Why should not the shepherd know the number of his flock? But God sees not as man sees. It is plain it was wrong in David to do it, and a great provocation to God, because he did it in the pride of his heart, and there is no sin that has in it more of contradiction, and therefore more of offense to God than pride. The sin was David's, he alone must bear the blame of it. But here we are told 1. How active the tempter was in it, verse 1. Satan stood up against Israel, and provoked David to do it. It is said, 2 Samuel 24 verse 1, that the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David to do it. The righteous judgments of God are to be observed and acknowledged even in the sins and unrighteousness of men. We are sure that God is not the author of sin, he tempts no man, and therefore, when it is said that he moved David to do it, it must be explained by what is intimated here, that, for wise and holy ends, he permitted the devil to do it. Here we trace this foul stream to its foundation. That Satan, the enemy of God and all good, should stand up against Israel, is not strange. It is what he aims at, to weaken the strength, diminish the numbers, and eclipse the glory of God's Israel, to whom he is Satan, a sworn adversary. But that he should influence David, the man of God's own heart, to do a wrong thing, may well be wondered at. One would think him one of those whom the wicked one touches not. No, even the best saints, till they come to heaven, must never think themselves out of the reach of Satan's temptations. Now, when Satan meant to do Israel a mischief, what course did he take? He did not move God against them to destroy them, as Job, chapter 2 verse 3, but he provoked David, the best friend they had, to number them, and so to offend God, and set him against them. Note 1. The devil does us more mischief by tempting us to sin against our God than he does by accusing us before our God. He destroys none but by their own hands too. The greatest spite he can do to the church of God is to tempt the rulers of the church to pride, for none can conceive the fatal consequences of that sin in all, especially in church rulers. You shall not be so, Luke 22 verse 26. 2. How passive the instrument was. Joab, the person whom David employed, was an active man in public business, but to this he was perfectly forced, and did it with the greatest reluctance imaginable. 1. He put in a remonstrance against it before he began it. No man more forward than he in anything that really tended to the honor of the king or the welfare of the kingdom, but in this matter he would gladly be excused. For 1. It was a needless thing. There was not occasion at all for it. God had promised to multiply them, and he needed not question the accomplishment of that promise. They were all his servants, and he needed not doubt of their loyalty and affection to him. Their number was as much his strength as he could desire. 2. It was a dangerous thing. In doing it he might be a cause of trespass to Israel, and might provoke God against them. This Joab apprehended, and yet David himself did not. The most learned in the laws of God are not always the most quick-sighted in the application of those laws. 2. He was quite weary of it before he had done it, for the king's word was abominable to Joab. Verse 6. Time was when whatever King David did pleased all the people. 2 Samuel 3 verse 36. But now there was a general disgust at these orders, which confirmed Joab in his dislike of them, so that, though the produce of this muster was really very great, yet he had no heart to perfect it, but left 2 tribes unnumbered, verses 5 and 6, 2 considerable ones, Levi and Benjamin, and perhaps was not very exact in numbering the rest, because he did not do it with any pleasure, which might be one occasion of the difference between the sums here in 2 Samuel 24 verse 9. David's numbering the people, 1017 BC. 7. And God was displeased with this thing, therefore he smote Israel. 8. And David said unto God, I have sinned greatly, because I have done this thing, but now, I beseech thee, do away the iniquity of thy servant, for I have done very foolishly. 9. And the Lord spake unto Gad, David's seer, saying, 10. Go and tell David, saying, Thus saith the Lord, I offer thee 3 things, choose thee one of them, that I may do it unto thee. 11. So Gad came to David, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, choose thee 12, either 3 years' famine, or 3 months to be destroyed before thy foes, while that the sword of thine enemies overtaketh thee, or else 3 days the sword of the Lord, even the pestilence, in the land, and the angel of the Lord destroying throughout all the coasts of Israel. Now therefore advise thyself what word I shall bring again to him that sent me. 13. And David said unto Gad, I am in a great strait, let me fall now into the hand of the Lord, for very great are his mercies, but let me not fall into the hand of man. 14. So the Lord sent pestilence upon Israel, and there fell of Israel 70,000 men. 15. And God sent an angel unto Jerusalem to destroy it, and as he was destroying, the Lord beheld, and he repented him of the evil, and said to the angel that destroyed, It is enough, stay now thine hand. And the angel of the Lord stood by the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. 16. And David lifted up his eyes, and saw the angel of the Lord stand between the earth and the heaven, having a drawn sword in his hand stretched out over Jerusalem. Then David and the elders of Israel, who were clothed in sackcloth, fell upon their faces. 17. And David said unto God, Is it not I that commanded the people to be numbered? Even I it is that have sinned and done evil indeed, but as for these sheep, what have they done? Let thine hand, I pray thee, O Lord my God, be on me, and on my father's house, but not on thy people, that they should be plagued. David is here under the rod for numbering the people, that rod of correction which drives out the foolishness that is bound up in the heart, the foolishness of pride. Let us briefly observe. 1. How he was corrected. If God's dearest children do amiss, they must expect to smart for it. 1. He is given to understand that God is displeased, and that it is no small uneasiness to so good a man as David. Verse 7. God takes notice of, and is displeased with, the sins of his people, and no sin is more displeasing to him than pride of heart, nor is anything more humbling, and grieving, and mortifying to a gracious soul, than to see itself under God's displeasure. 2. He is put to his choice whether he will be punished by war, famine, or pestilence, for punished he must be, and by one of these. Thus, for his further humiliation, he is put into a strait, a great strait, and has the terror of all the 3 judgments impressed upon his mind, no doubt to his great amazement, while he is considering which he shall choose. 3. He hears of 70,000 of his subjects who in a few hours were struck dead by the pestilence. Verse 14. He was proud of the multitude of his people, but divine justice took a course to make them fewer. Justly is that taken from us, weakened, or embittered to us, which we are proud of. David must have the people numbered. Bring me the number of them, says he, that I may know it. But now God numbers them after another manner, numbers to the sword, Isaiah 65 verse 12. And David had another number of them brought, more to his confusion than was to his satisfaction, namely, the number of the slain, a black bill of mortality, which is a drawback to his muster roll. 4. He sees the destroying angel, with his sword drawn against Jerusalem, verse 16. This could not but be very terrible to him, as it was a visible indication of the anger of heaven, and threatened the utter destruction of that beloved city. Pestilences make the greatest devastations in the most populous places. The sight of an angel, though coming peaceably and on a friendly errand, has made even mighty men to tremble. How dreadful then must this sight be of an angel with a drawn sword in his hand, a flaming sword, like that of the cherubim, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. While we lie under the wrath of God, the holy angels are armed against us, though we see them not as David did. 2. How he bore the correction. 1. He made a very penitent confession of his sin, and prayed earnestly for the pardon of it, verse 8. Now he owned that he had sinned greatly, had done foolishly, very foolishly, and he entreated that, however he might be corrected for it, the iniquity of it might be done away. 2. He accepted the punishment of his iniquity. Let thy hand be on me, and on my father's house, verse 17. I submit to the rod, only let me be the sufferer, for I am the sinner, mine is the guilty head at which the sword should be pointed. 3. He cast himself upon the mercy of God, though he knew he was angry with him, and did not entertain any hard thoughts of him. However it be, let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercies are great, verse 13. Good men, even when God frowns upon them, think well of him. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. 4. He expressed a very tender concern for the people, and it went to his heart to see them plagued for his transgression. These sheep, what have they done? Ornan's threshing floor, 1017 BC. 18. Then the angel of the Lord commanded Gad to say to David, that David should go up, and set up an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. 19. And David went up at the saying of Gad, which he spake in the name of the Lord. 20. And Ornan turned back, and saw the angel, and his 4 sons with him hid themselves. Now Ornan was threshing wheat. 21. And as David came to Ornan, Ornan looked and saw David, and went out of the threshing floor, and bowed himself to David with his face to the ground. 22. Then David said to Ornan, Grant me the place of this threshing floor, that I may build an altar therein unto the Lord. Thou shalt grant it me for the full price, that the plague may be stayed from the people. 23. And Ornan said unto David, Take it to thee, and let my lord the king do that which is good in his eyes. Lo, I give thee the oxen also for burnt offerings, and the threshing instruments for wood, and the wheat for the meat offering, I give it all. 24. And King David said to Ornan, Nay, but I will verily buy it for the full price, for I will not take that which is thine for the Lord, nor offer burnt offerings without cost. 25. So David gave to Ornan for the place 600 shekels of gold by weight. 26. And David built there an altar unto the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and called upon the Lord, and he answered him from heaven by fire upon the altar of burnt offering. 27. And the Lord commanded the angel, and he put up his sword again into the sheath thereof. 28. At that time when David saw that the Lord had answered him in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, then he sacrificed there. 29. For the tabernacle of the Lord, which Moses made in the wilderness, and the altar of the burnt offering, were at that season in the high place at Gibeon. 30. But David could not go before it to inquire of God, for he was afraid because of the sword of the angel of the Lord. We have here the controversy concluded, and, upon David's repentance, his peace made with God. Though thou wast angry with me, thy anger is turned away. 1. A stop was put to the progress of the execution, verse 15. When David repented of the sin, God repented of the judgment, and ordered the destroying angel to stay his hand and sheath his sword, verse 27. 2. Direction was given to David to rear an altar in the threshing floor of Ornan, verse 18. The angel commanded the prophet Gad to bring David this direction. The same angel that had, in God's name, carried on the war, is here forward to set on foot the treaty of peace, for angels do not desire the woeful day. The angel could have given this order to David himself, but he chose to do it by his seer, that he might put an honor upon the prophetic office. Thus the revelation of Jesus Christ was notified by the angel to John, and by him to the churches. The commanding of David to build an altar was a blessed token of reconciliation, for, if God had been pleased to kill him, he would not have appointed, because he would not have accepted, a sacrifice at his hands. 3. David immediately made a bargain with Ornan for the threshing floor, for he would not serve God at other people's charge. Ornan generously offered it to him gratis, not only in complaisance to the king, but because he had himself seen the angel, verse 20, which so terrified him that he and his 4 sons hid themselves, as unable to bear the brightness of his glory and afraid of his drawn sword. Under these apprehensions he was willing to do anything towards making the atonement. Those that are duly sensible of the terrors of the Lord will do all they can, in their places, to promote religion, and encourage all the methods of reconciliation for the turning away of God's wrath. 4. God testified his acceptance of David's offerings on this altar. He answered him from heaven by fire, verse 26. To signify that God's anger was turned away from him, the fire that might justly have fastened upon the sinner fastened upon the sacrifice and consumed that, and, upon this, the destroying sword was returned into its sheath. Thus Christ was made sin and a curse for us, and it pleased the Lord to bruise him, that through him God might be to us, not a consuming fire, but a reconciled Father. 5. He continued to offer his sacrifices upon this altar. The brazen altar which Moses made was at Gibeon, verse 29, and there all the sacrifices of Israel were offered, but David was so terrified at the sight of the sword of the angel that he could not go thither, verse 30. The business required haste, when the plague was begun. Aaron must go quickly, nay, he must run, to make atonement, Numbers 16 verse 46, 47. And the case here was no less urgent, so that David had not time to go to Gibeon, nor durst he leave the angel with his sword drawn over Jerusalem, lest the fatal stroke should be given before he came back. And therefore God, in tenderness to him, bade him build an altar in that place, dispensing with his own law concerning one altar because of the present distress, and accepting the sacrifices offered on this new altar, which was not set up in opposition to that, but in concurrence with it. The symbols of unity were not so much insisted on as unity itself. Nay, when the present distress was over, as it should seem, David, as long as he lived, sacrificed there, though the altar at Gibeon was still kept up, for God had owned the sacrifices that were here offered, and had testified his acceptance of them, verse 28. On those administrations in which we have experienced the tokens of God's presence, and have found that he is with us of a truth, it is good to continue our attendance. Here God had graciously met me, and therefore, I will still expect to meet with him.